I'm Pappy Mac. This is the Loyalist Garage, and you're watching another episode of British Car History. Today, we're going to talk about the Triumph Spitfire. Much like the Ford Mustang in the United States, the Triumph Spitfire was a small car named after a World War II fighter plane, in this case, the Supermarine Spitfire. Although that's not the logo from Supermarine, that's actually a logo that Triumph used on the cars later in production. In fact, it even features, to try and further connotate towards that whole World War II history, we saved the world, it has the RAF roundel, which they modified slightly just to avoid conflict with the UK government. Again, Triumph wasted absolutely no time drawing the lines between their little sports car and the hero of the Battle of Britain. The Spitfire would then be passed off to this gentleman right here, Giovanni Michelotti. Michelotti came from Italy. He was a prolific designer. He would go on to pen numerous sports cars of the 1960s, but Triumph was ahead of the curve, and they picked him up in the 1950s. So they got one of the best industrial designers they could get their hands on to pen their cars, and it paid off handsomely. You had such great designs as the TR series, the Spitfire, you name it, he had his hands on it. And in 1956, he would lay out the Spitfire for Triumph. The Spitfire was a project that he created that was based off of existing off-the-shelf parts at Standard Triumph, which was an independent brand at the time. And it was just a small car. It was designed for proof of concept, and Triumph was really struggling financially at this point. Austin and Morris had just merged, making them the biggest car company in the UK. Think of something the size of General Motors in terms of production versus largely an independent brand. Think of maybe even AMC might have been bigger than Standard Triumph at the time. So there wasn't really anything that they could do to kind of hold off against this onslaught of the new sports cars being thrown out by Austin and all of BMC. By 1957, the situation at Triumph was so desperate that Standard Triumph would go ahead and shelve the Spitfire project and put it into a basically storage area. It was covered with a tarp and kind of forgotten about as things just continued to get worse for the company. Thankfully, in 1960, the Leyland Truck Company stepped up and they purchased Standard Triumph and turned it into their car division. And in 1960, when they were kind of assessing inventory of what they just bought and figuring out what they could fix, they saw this little swoopy sports car just covered in blankets on the factory floor. And when they figured out it was Michelotti's design, it was immediately greenlit and rushed into production. Now, like many of its competitors, it featured Smith's gauges, Lucas electronics, and a four-cylinder engine. In this case, it would use the Standard Triumph SC Series engine, which was the smaller of the four cylinders. This was a non-linered block, meaning that it was all cast in one piece without individual cylinder liners like you would find in the TR series. The Spitfire would enjoy no less than 5 distinct generations, this one being a Mark III right here, the first major body change to go on to the Spitfire. The first two cars shown were a Mark I and a Mark II. They're virtually identical. The Mark III, the tub and the bonnet were all changed, along with the cockpit layout. It was a considerable upgrade over those early cars, and it introduced a new larger engine, the 1300. Now this one here is a Mark IV. Again, some minor changes to the body, particularly in the rear wings, the quarter panels as we call them here in the States, and the bonnet, the hood. For the most part though, this was just an upgrade over the previous generation. Things such as horsepower were boosted, and you had a little bit more creature comforts with the Mark IV. The Mark IV was the general design that the Spitfire would be built in up until the end, but it would be a slightly different generation called the 1500. The 1500 would share its engine with the MG Midget, and it proudly displayed the 1500 badge on the front along with thicker overriders, as we call them, bumperettes in the States, and a couple other changes that were made. This is the car that Triumph produced right up until the end, with the only change being in 79 and 80 they had completely rubber bumpers. They got rid of the chrome. But for the most part, this is it. This was the last generation of the car. I'm not even going to show the rubber bumper because nobody wants them. But the 1500 engine in the Midget actually had slightly less horsepower, even though they were advertised as being the same in almost every way. Now, in this video, I'm not going to get into it too much, but there was a 6-cylinder coupe version of the Spitfire called the GT6. That car was largely based on a design created for Triumph's entry into Le Mans, but that's a whole other story. This car is so different from the Spitfire that it's going to get its own video. 1980 was the end of the line for the Spitfire after more than 315,000 cars would be produced, not including the GT6s. The Spitfire would go on to make its mark in motoring history. It's been featured in a ton of different movies. It is a cultural icon, very much a car of the 70s. It's easy to work on. They're fun to drive. They did fantastic in racing. These cars have every pedigree that you could ask for out of a much more expensive car. So, if you learned something today and you like Triumph Spitfires after watching this video, go ahead, give us a like, share, comment. And if you have a Triumph Spitfire that you would like to see restored, or you're interested in purchasing one, feel free to reach out to us. As always, stay classy.